France was the first Western country that demonstrated a significant interest in Ibn Khaldun, although the motives behind that interest were questionable. But a century later, the English-speaking world would start to discover Ibn Khaldun and popularize his name furthermore. So far, the English-speaking world paid very little attention to the ideas of Ibn Khaldun until the early 20th century. It's the historian Arnold Toynbee who was among the first to acknowledge Ibn Khaldun's intellectual value, because he was deeply intrigued by the rise and fall of ancient Greeks and Romans. He somehow considered Ibn Khaldun as a sort of intellectual ancestor. He described the Muqaddimah as, quote-unquote, undoubtedly the greatest work of its kind that has ever been created by any mind in any time or place. He is also famous for being part of the British delegation during the Paris Conference in 1919, which had eventually resulted in the carving of the Muslim Ottoman Empire, in pieces shared between French and British mandates. With an interesting anecdote he tells about the Prime Minister of the UK, Lloyd George. Toynbee was supposed to deliver some papers to him, but George did not notice his presence and started thinking aloud. Quote unquote. Mesopotamia? Yes. Oil? Irrigation? We must have Mesopotamia. Palestine? The Holy Land? Zionism? Yeah. We must have Palestine. What is there in Syria? Let the French have that. End of quote. On top of that, Toynbee was a deeply religious Christian, and one of his goals was to contradict the widespread belief that the Roman Empire was destroyed by Christianity and barbarism. As a believer of an Abrahamic religion, he was greatly attracted by Ibn Khaldun's pessimism when it comes to worldly affairs. For him, and probably for Ibn Khaldun too, the process of history can only be properly understood by a believer in God. Therefore, he was convinced that the barbarian invasions of Rome by the Vandals and Goths were a symptom and not a cause of the decline of the empire. Also, Toynbee was relying on the translation in French by Étienne Quatremer, mentioned previously. After Toynbee came Franz Rosenthal. He was a German Jew who fled Nazi Germany in 1938 and eventually moved to the United States, where he became professor of Semitic languages at Yale University. His translation of the Muqaddimah in the 1950s is perhaps the most widespread and still used to this day. It is based on a range of manuscripts, including one in Istanbul from Ibn Khaldun's own hand. Just like Baron de Slan's translation, or probably less, his translation drew both praise and criticism. Many denounced that Rosenthal was in error when he rendered the word Arab as Arab, because it could bring confusion to readers, thinking it would always be used as an ethnic term. Some historians see it more proper to translate Arab as camel nomad, which is more of a term referring to a type of tribe or a material condition. Although sometimes Ibn Khaldun does indeed use the term in its ethnic sense, which is why many readers are confused when he harshly criticizes what he calls Arabs, although he describes himself as a proud Arab from Yemen. Some scholars like the Moroccan Abdeslam Shaddadi, one of the most renowned specialists of Ibn Khaldun today, says that Rosenthal's translation is for the most part accurate, although it is sometimes rigid. Outside the English and French-speaking world, the Muqaddimah has been mainly translated into Urdu by Ahmed Hussein Allahabad in the early 20th century. It was translated into Persian by Mohammed Parvin Gunabadi, into Portuguese by the Lebanese-Brazilian José Khoury, and into Japanese by the Buddhist priest Morimoto Kosei. There is a possibility that Ibn Khaldun has been read, or at least was known, by classic German social scientists like Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels, or Max Weber, although it was not translated into German at their time. Engels, one of the founding thinkers of communism, has mentioned in some of his writings a theoretical model of rise and decline in Islamic civilizations. Moreover, Karl Marx cited Baron de Slan's translation in some reading notes he made in Algeria in the 1880s, as Karl Marx was spending some time there for medical reasons due to Algeria's warmer climate, before passing away. But Ibn Khaldun was also used by Muslim modernists like Jamal ad-Din al-Afghani or Muhammad Abduh, who made special studies of the Muqaddimah, highlighting its Islamic specificity, at a time where it was not much read in the Muslim world. Al-Afghani, for example, was using the Muqaddimah as a teaching text when he was in Egypt in the 1870s. Muhammad Abduh used to lecture in Cairo and wrote what seems to be a Khaldunian philosophy of history and society. Just like Ibn Khaldun, he denounced modern luxury and loose living. However, we do not know the details since the Egyptian government seized his notes and burned them in 1879. Nonetheless, nowadays many studies of Ibn Khaldun's thought have been produced by Arabic-speaking academics. We could also mention the Gamazir Smail Goumezian, who also happened to be Algerian's ex-Minister of Commerce, or the Moroccan Abdeslam Shaddadi, who retranslated the Muqaddimah into French and heavily commented it. Shaddadi stresses Ibn Khaldun's universality and argues that his thought is still relevant today. It is not uncommon to see streets, neighborhoods, schools or hospitals named after Ibn Khaldun in the Muslim world, or even statues of him like in Béjaïa, Algeria, or Tunis, Tunisia. But too few are those who have actually read him, or gone beyond praising him as, quote-unquote, the first sociologist, superficially using him as a tool for religious or nationalistic pride. For Shaddadi, the best for Ibn Khaldun's posterity is yet to come, when his intellectual successors will not just focus on the appropriation of his name, but also use his work as an analytic tool for contemporary societies and phenomena. Some academics like the Malaysian Syed Farid Al-Attas, Murtaza Hashemi from University of Bristol, or the French historian Gabriel Martinez-Gros have made such attempts of analyzing modern social phenomenon using Ibn Khaldun's framework, respectively about the regimes of Syria and Saudi Arabia for the first, Silicon Valley startups and big tech companies for the second, and Muslim, Chinese, and Indian empires for the latter. It should be also noted that Ibn Khaldun has left some obvious and less obvious prints in contemporary popular culture, in novels or movies. But that would be a whole other topic to cover. Some famous personalities in the West have made reference to him without fully grasping what Ibn Khaldun was really writing about. We could cite the ex-president of the United States, Ronald Reagan.
I studied economics in college when I was young, and I learned there about a man named Ibn Khaldun, who lived 1,200 years ago in Egypt. And 1,200 years ago, he said, in the beginning of the empire, the rates were low, the tax rates were low, but the revenue was great. He said in the end of the empire, when the empire was collapsing, the rates were great and the revenue was low.
Or the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson, both using excerpts from Ibn Khaldun's work to justify tax cuts.
Well, actually, of course, as the great Tunisian scholar and sage Ibn Khaldun pointed out as early as the 14th century, there are plenty of taxes that you can cut which will actually increase your revenues. And there are ways of making sure that you stimulate growth, you stimulate enterprise, and you get more in.
There is also Mark Zuckerberg, the founder and CEO of the social network conglomerate Facebook, who personally recommended reading the Muqaddimah on his account. Although his comprehension of it is not perfect, it has made a lot of great publicity. Also, several eponymous universities and foundations have started flourishing in recent decades, paying homage to Ibn Khaldun's thought. In Algeria, Tunisia, Turkey, Indonesia, among many other countries, with most notably Ibn Khaldun University in Istanbul, that explicitly aims to rehabilitate Ibn Khaldun's thought by putting him at the center of their social science curriculum, led by their president, Recep Şentürk, an academic strongly advocating the promotion of non-Western social science theories and epistemology. So, nowadays, unlike thinkers who have literally shaped the course of the world like Karl Marx and communist parties all around the world in the 20th and 21st centuries, very few in the general public know about Ibn Khaldun. Even among Muslims interested in history, people rarely know him beyond his name. And among social scientists in general, there is an almost complete ignorance of his work, as it is not taught in most universities teaching social sciences. It is obvious that neither his social or historical theories are discussed enough. The highest degree of knowledge about his work is usually found among specialists of the Muslim world, whether they be historians, sociologists, or anthropologists. He is also described as a historical figure that is not functional to describe societies today. Plus, his work is often decoupled from his theological thought, although it cannot be separated from his analysis of society and history. However, at least in English literature, more and more works about Ibn Khaldun have flourished in the past 20 years, but he is yet to be added to sociology, philosophy, or history curriculums. Ibn Khaldun is one of the most profound intellectuals the Muslim world has ever produced, and by far. His work remains important because he opened the door to Islamic social sciences, which tradition and epistemology has been eclipsed for centuries. Plus, reading him is of utmost importance because it helps us maintain a healthy relationship with our intellectual roots. Muslim societies are probably among the most nostalgic of their past. They have a hard time dealing with their past and their present, and their lack of vision for their future. Many issues are yet to be solved, like how to deal with Western ideological domination, modernity, the place of spirituality and morality in our lives, etc. In this context, Ibn Khaldun can be of great use for emancipation. He needs to be read and understood, to find solutions to our problems in our own terms, and build more on top of his legacy, because again, he has written this muqaddimah for us. If you enjoyed that video, don't hesitate to like it and spread it to people you think it would be beneficial to. Your constructive feedback and reflections are very welcome. Assalamu alaikum and see you next time.